and it's one of immersion that takes place on my side as a, for want of a better word, curator. But it's also one that has to take place on the artist side. So the process with something like Desert X or Elevation or any of these site responsive shows that I'm involved in is, more than anything else about immersing the artist in the landscape, because really it's a conversation between the art and the landscape. So unless you're receptive to the voice of the landscape, then there's no real conversation to be had. And then it becomes something else. It becomes something more like public art, or the pejorative version of public art, which is plop art, where a piece of an artwork is just plonked in a different context. And to me, that's really not of any interest. So that process of immersion is an essential part of it. And the immersion is in the landscape with the broadest definition of landscape. It's not just the environment, it's the cultural, historical landscape, it's the geological landscape, it's the archaeological landscape, it's the, so very much social landscape, often in many cases the racial landscape, and those social histories that have been written into it and on it.
Hey folks, thank you for tuning in to episode 52 of the Ecosystem Member Podcast. For the final episode of season 3, I think we have one of the coolest guests we've ever had on the podcast. Neville Wakefield has been called by The New Yorker one of the best curators around, and he's worked with MoMA PS1 and Freeze projects, in addition to many others in the contemporary art world. The topic of our conversation focuses on his 2 site-specific projects, Desert X, where he is the founding artistic director, and Elevation 1049, which took place in the Swiss Alps. In this episode, we talk about what it is like to curate a show in a changing environment exposed to all of the elements of nature, where no 2 experiences of viewing the art are exactly the same. We also talk about how Desert X artists are really working in collaboration with nature for these shows. We also talk about the value of breaking out of the traditional white cube gallery and museum space, and a couple of exciting projects that he has coming up, including asking the question about what art looks like in space. Neville is really a legend in the contemporary art world, so you'll have to forgive my slightly nervous disposition in asking some of the questions. I was really excited when he agreed to chat, and actually interviewing him was a bit surreal. But as you'll hear, he's a really thoughtful person who wants to expand the usual circle of people who engage with art, so I really think you will enjoy this conversation, even if you aren't familiar with the art world. If this happens to be your first episode of Ecosystem Member and you are interested in more art and nature episodes, please make sure to check out our past episodes with guests such as Lucia Pietroiusti, talking about her work at the Serpentine around non-human consciousness. Also, Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, the artist, discussing her Pollinator Pathmaker pieces, as well as episodes with Ackroyd and Harvey, Jenny Kendler, and the duo behind Eyes as Big as Plates. It is really such a privilege to get to speak with these amazing artists and curators, and I hope you enjoy listening to them as much as I enjoyed recording these episodes. Without further delay, here is the latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast with writer and curator Neville Wakefield. Today on the Ecosystem Member Podcast, I am stoked to be joined by Neville Wakefield, independent writer, curator, and founding artistic director of Desert X. Thanks for joining us, Neville.
Thank you, Rick. Happy to be here.
So we always ask our guests, same first question. As a person, as a curator of, Desert X, a desert-based art exhibition, you've also done stuff in the Swiss Alps as well. Like, how do you think about your relationship with nature?
I mean, it's omnipresent. I grew up on some remote islands off the southwest coast of England, 50 miles offshore, an archipelago of probably under 2,000 people total, 5 inhabited islands. So, I really grew up with these, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, with these boundless horizons. So nature's always been more than just a backdrop. It's essential to my sort of way of looking at the world. And so, something like Desert X makes perfect sense because there are parallels between the desert and the ocean. Obviously, both are apparently boundless spaces. Both apparently, people would say, that they're blank canvases. Neither are. If you spend time with the ocean, you start to read it. You start to be able to understand it. You see the presence of weather and meteorology and temperature shears in the water and all these kind of things. The same with the desert. Yeah, I mean, nature is fundamental to the way that I perceive the world. I mean, I think we get detached from that, and we don't go for enough walks. We don't spend enough time outside. We spend too much time on our screens, which we're doing now.
With a positive end, hopefully, to this one. So when you think about that essential way of looking at the world, you've got a curation project coming up. Could be Desert X, could be some of the other stuff you've done in other outdoor environments. Like, what is your process? Do you go and just take walks? Do you pitch a tent and hang out, spend a few nights in the desert? Like, how do you get to know or understand a place or be able to read a place to then like think about how to curate the art that needs to go in it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it is one of immersion, and it's one of immersion that takes place on my side as a, for want of a better word, curator. But it's also one that has to take place on the artist side. So the process with something like Desert X or Elevation or any of these site responsive shows that I'm involved in is, more than anything else about immersing the artist in the landscape, because really it's a conversation between the art and the landscape. So unless you're receptive to the voice of the landscape, then there's no real conversation to be had. And then it becomes something else. It becomes something more like public art, or the pejorative version of public art, which is plop art, where a piece of an artwork is just plonked in a different context. And to me, that's really not of any interest. So that process of immersion is an essential part of it. And the immersion is in the landscape with the broadest definition of landscape. It's not just the environment. It's the cultural, historical landscape. It's the geological landscape. It's the archaeological landscape. It's the, so very much social landscape. Often in many cases, the racial landscape and those social histories that have been written into it and on it. So it's a complex. It's really not just about environment.
And so do you spend time in the library, or is that more of the artist, spending the time to understand that social history, that cultural context of the land and the history sort of bound up in it? Is how do you think about that part, or how do you prepare for that part?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's less academic than that idea of going and reading up about it. Though certainly in terms of history, that becomes part of it. It's more about speaking to the people who live in that environment and for whom that history is part of their day-to-day existence, rather than the rather than the more distant version that's bound in literature and books. Not that doesn't have a part, but that's certainly where you'll find some of the mythologies. But really, it's more, I think, about the way that those histories become embedded in the landscape itself and in the practices that surround it and in the lives of the people who inhabit it.
I probably should back up just slightly. So for folks who aren't familiar with Desert X, it takes place in the Coachella Valley, and there are these site-specific installations of art that are put all over the place. I remember one, we sort of got off the highway, and it was this amazing sort of stack and connection of, forgetting the artist names, but storage containers, like shipping containers.
Matt Johnson,
you probably remember the art.
Matt Johnson, reclining figure.
So you've got that one, which was sort of off the highway. There was another one of a sculpture that we sort of had to go in and around, and it was a little bit hard to find. So these create a little bit of an adventure in and of itself. But like when you're curating or putting together Desert X, how does that process look like for matching sort of the artist, the idea for the work, and the space? So
it's definitely quite a process. Yeah, it's not about, again, this is sort of distinction between public art and site responsive or site specific art that I made before. It's not about saying here's a site, make a piece of work about it. It's really about the artists finding a site of interest that resonates with them, that speaks to them, and then making artwork that where the landscape is effectively generative in some way. It's a journey of discovery. It's like, both literal and metaphorical, and often it's about getting lost, which I think we undervalue in this time of kind of geolocation and where we feel that where the coordinates of our existence are really always available. And one of the things that I think draws people to it, we live in an age of geolocation, and we get places by ways, and we don't really know what's ahead. Is the possibility that you might get lost in this process, and it's only by getting lost that you can get found. And in fact, one of my favorite pieces was from I think the 2019 edition in the Coachella Valley, which was a piece by an Italian artist who goes under the moniker of Norma Jean, and it was a piece called Shybot, and it was an autonomous rover vehicle that was covered in sensors, IR sensors, and motion detectors, and all this kind of stuff, that was designed to do the opposite of what that kind of machine is normally designed to do, which is to avoid humans. So it became this kind of God particle, and kind of invoked the whole, the biblical thing of being cast into the wilderness to find yourself looking for the thing that you can never find, blah, blah, blah. And it was a beautiful, beautiful poetic piece. And, it wasn't found, but many people went to look at it. And so, those ideas of getting lost in doing the thing that we don't normally do, because we're very rarely lost, of getting lost either in the landscape or in the art in order to find something which we can't yet define, are really essential to the project, I think.
And that kind of speaks to, I think, a larger thread of your work around sort of breaking down the traditional walls of the institution, sort of going beyond, I guess, the white cube galleries or the museum. So from your perspective as an artistic director and a curator, like, what are some of the benefits of like pulling the art outside of these traditional spaces and putting them in new places where people might have to get lost to find them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the chief benefit is new audiences, and I think that's really what something like Desert X has proved, in terms of, our visitors numbers are really extraordinary, and are the envy of most institutions. And I think there are a number of reasons for this. The main reason is our mandate. The mandate for Desert X is to really lower the threshold of entry. So, in a traditional institution, you have an architectural barrier, right? You have an economic barrier. We don't have architectural or economic. You have a social barrier, because often, they're kind of scary places, or there's some, fierce looking front desk person who's ignoring you, whatever. You have you then go into a controlled environment where the narrative is controlled, and pretty much everything else. So there's very little opportunity for you to have discourse about the experience, because of this level of control, I think. And then finally, there's a sort of ontological barrier. The work in a white cube has been extracted from the context in which it was generated, and it becomes in a context of no context. So unless you know something about art history, or, as in my case, we're privileged enough to have been in the artist's studio and seen the context out of which the work's come, there's really not much. The path of entry into the work is pretty limited. I think the beauty of something like Desert X, and the reason for doing this, and the reason that it does attract new audiences, is because really the landscape, the environment, becomes a studio. So in a way, the privileged position of the curator of having this knowledge is transferred onto the audience. So everyone has a their ideas about landscape. Everyone has a sense of how they relate to it. So then to see it through an artist's eyes, but it be part of that process, already it's invitational, already it's inclusive. I think that's really important.
And we should also mention you've been bringing the Desert X experience to Saudi Arabia as well. It's been in the Coachella Valley historically, but you're doing this more recent iteration. Does any of that change, like culturally, in terms of, the West has its own view of like the white cube and the how that should go versus in Saudi Arabia? I'm more asking out of curiosity because I don't have as familiarity with the art scene there.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, obviously that transposition of having the two is about creating cross-cultural dialogue, but it's also creating about cross-desert environment
Mm-hmm.
and seeing how how different cultures have adapted to ideas of scarcity of various forms, and that's obviously really important dialogue. What's interesting and really different about Saudi is that in Saudi there's no real culture of art institutions. So for a lot of people, the history in the West is that land art kind of broke out of the institution in the late 60s, early 70s, and the institution came first, then the jailbreak. In Saudi, the first experience of many people of art is actually from the outside. It is actually in nature. It's art in the landscape, and then now retroactively they're building museums in huge numbers and putting collections into that kind of conservational environment. But yeah, it's an interesting inversion of the narrative that we've had here.
And to go back, you were talking about sort of seeing a piece come together, spending time with the artists in the studio. Are the artists thinking about, because you're out of the white cube, because you're out of the museum, you're adding in heat or wind or bird song or the smell of the, local flora? I think when I did my most recent Desert X visit, it was raining and it kind of created this like weird sort of misty atmosphere, which like the work, it changed my perception of the work. One, because we just didn't want to stand in the rain for as long as we probably normally would have been if it would have been a dry, sunny day. But like,
Yeah,
engaging all the senses, is that part of that artistic or even the curatorial process, like understanding what nature might do to the perception of it or the sense of it?
yeah, 100%. I mean, these are works that are made not about nature, but in collaboration with nature. And I think some of the most successful ones, in incorporated. And the other important thing is that they're living artworks. This is not a static experience; it's dynamic. It's changing. Most of evidently, the light is changing every day. But as you say, you caught a rare day when there was rain in the desert. The smells, the senses, all of this, and I think this is another of the things that makes it so attractive, is that the artwork isn't, in this state of sort of rigor mortis in the coffin of architecture. It's a dynamic living entity. And you see that in all sorts of ways, from like Doug Aitken's Mirage, which was this house-like structure that then sort of cinematized the landscape and literally reflected it on its walls and disappeared, to something like Agnes Dennis's Living Pyramid, which is a structure that she built, which is about growth and transformation, and started off as this pyramidal form, which was pretty bare and was planted, and by the end of it, planted with native flora, and by the end of it was rich in flora and things being pollinated and literally and metaphorically ideas and insects, and so what I think is attractive to me is that no two experiences are the same, and your journey of discovery is not mine, and we're not added to that, when we don't, it's a non-prescriptive situation. We're not saying you have to go and see it in this order. You can just see one, or you can see them all. You can see them any structure you want, any order.
Yeah. And I have a hunch that this question probably isn't something that concerns you. But so maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of your colleagues or the artists that you've worked with. Is it hard to give up as a curator, as an artist, sort of give up that control that comes with a more traditional environment when you're just saying, I have to give up control of this work and it might be influenced by a rainy day or who knows what might happen? Is that something that's hard for the artist or the curator in your experience?
I mean, yes, it's often harder for the curator, I think, in some ways. I mean, I think artists are maybe more adaptive at embracing change, and that's what it's really about. Traditional curation is about control. You have literally climate control. We have no control over our climate.
Mm-hmm.
You have temperature control. You have narrative control. You have all these things that allow you then to determine a narrative. Well, it's so different in that sense, and there has to be an embrace of chance, of change, and some of the pieces do change in really extraordinary ways and unexpected ways, and sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better, but they're living entities. I think most curators come from an institutional background or an academic background.
Mm-hmm.
And that's harder than artists who are sort of endemically used to flexible ideas and flexible circumstances, and seeing how different things can fit and different things can work.
Sort of on that idea of change and the temporariness of these pieces, I lived in London for like 5 years, and actually on my route to work, I could walk through the middle of the Tate Modern building. I mean,
Oh
I could
yeah,
check out what was in Turbine Hall. I could it was actually a quicker way for me to get to the office. And I really hate to say this, but at a certain point, I kind of forgot where I was and lost the sense that I was looking at like amazing art on a Monday through Friday basis when I was going into the office every
right.
single day. Like, is there something about the temporariness of Desert X being a non-permanent thing where, I don't know, maybe you think like, do people appreciate it more? Does the artist try to create something that grabs people's attention quicker because they know they don't have the benefit of like 2 decades in a museum?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I have the same experience here with galleries. I miss so many shows because I think, oh, it's going to in museums, it's going to be up forever, and of course it's not.
Yeah.
But I think there is the kind of urgency um, to the Desert X model that um, is interesting and drives people to go and see it, um, and there's an immediacy to the conversations that surround it. So you know, you go with a group of friends and then discuss your experience and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think it is pretty different.
Yeah. On that immediacy, there's been some conversation recent years. Justin Bieber shoots a music video in Iceland and they trample the local landscape and all of
Yeah,
that. Some of the work in Desert X, like you mentioned, Doug Aiken's Mirage, like extraordinarily social media friendly. Like there's some amazing pictures of it across social media, people tagging their location, all of that other sort of stuff. Something that maybe in a traditional museum, because there's all these rules and all this control, you don't really have to worry about. Like, does that change how you approach the work? Like, if you think something's too popular, do you have to make sure it's not in like a very sensitive area so that it doesn't get sort of trampled and the landscape doesn't get destroyed?
yeah. I mean, definitely we have to be sensitive about that. And Doug's show was. I mean, Doug's Mirage was the sort of unexpected hit of that first show, and the biggest problem became one of parking, for instance, and the disruption of that. So suddenly you get into these logistical issues that you'd never sort of anticipated, particularly when we did that one and we didn't think anyone was going to see it at all, really. But yeah, the policy is to get as close to leave no trace as possible. It is essential that we don't disrupt the landscape. We're trying to, as I say, collaborate with it, not impose upon it. And those things do become really, really critical. And often we've had to move sites because there'll be a, conservation easement, or someone will have said that there's some migration that happens to be taking place through it or something like that. And we have to be sensitive to that. As human beings, we're very destructive. And the social media aspect is interesting and definitely a part of it. Yeah.
Because it does definitely open those doors and break down a lot of those barriers. But then sometimes, as we found in other examples, it breaks it down too much, and then you have to you have a flood of people that you sort of have to be aware of. And that probably is a little bit different than like when you're doing something like elevation with work in the snow, in the snow on the Swiss Alps, like actually getting there. You really have to get lost. You might have to ski in. I didn't see it in person, but there's like things you have to do. Was there anything different about that? I don't know, maybe that surprised you about curating for the desert versus the Alps?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot that was different. I mean, obviously, the sort of conceit of actually, funnily enough, the conceit of elevation was that we're exchanging the white cube for the white landscape. So, this sort of other form of blankness, which simply isn't true of the desert. The desert is anything but blank. So that was the sort of conceit. But it was very different, not just environmentally, but I think it came from a different place as well, where it was in a part of the Alps, Stade, which has a big collecting community there. So there's a concentration of wealth and there's a concentration of art in that landscape, but it's all in the way of many things Swiss behind closed doors. So what we were trying to do was really extrovert some of that and put art in the landscape to celebrate it and to create something for local communities that they could participate in and feel ownership of, because most of the art was sequestered in the vaults of the wealthy.
So to sort of bring our conversation to a close, we talked about some of the work that's been at Desert X, some of the different environments that you've curated in. Is there anything on the bucket list of like, I'd love to do something in this environment? I don't know, the Grand Canyon, or maybe on your home island off the coast of England. Like, is there a space that you are in or that you've seen that you're like, I think I could really bring something magical to this space through my artistic direction and curation?
I mean, yeah, there are always phases. There are two projects that are both in very gestational stages at the moment, but that I'm really excited about both. One is in Svalbard, which is
Mm-hmm.
formerly Spitsbergen. It's an archipelago of islands in the Arctic. It has the highest density of PhDs per capita in the world. It's a research place. It's the bellwether of environmental change at the moment. It has a large polar bear population that you can literally register changes in the environment. So it's this extraordinary, like, natural bellwether archive, and then it has other interesting aspects. The global seed bank has just been taken there, and there's another digital archive that is going there because it's remote enough and stable enough in certain ways to house them. But the thing that's perhaps most unique about it is the political aspect, that it's a non-sovereign territory. So it's administered by Norway, but it's a treaty of I think 46 nations or something. And that's really intriguing to me because obviously with global warming, climate change, the whole of the future of the Arctic and the future of the Northwest Passages and so on is going to change the way we perceive the world, they'll change global trade, all the rest of it. So how we cooperate or fail to cooperate in these kind of spaces becomes really important. And I do think that Svalbard is a model of international cooperation for space at a time when we have our own president trying to grab Greenland and all of this kind of stuff for the same political and strategic reasons. So that's one place that's really intriguing to me. And the other project that I have is actually has some similarities to that, which is space. And I've been approached by the space industry to kind of rethink what art can do there. I have no interest in putting terrestrial objects in orbit, but I do have an interest in how space will be colonized. How artists can provide models, and artists and other kinds of thinkers can provide models, alternative models to traditional grabs of not land in this case, but space itself. And yeah, so those are sort of more, in some ways, more extreme versions of the same thing, but super exciting.
Yeah. I know I said that was going to be the last question, but how do you put yourself, how do you get in the headspace to do work around curating or artistic direction of space? Do you read a bunch of sci-fi? How do you put your head in that space, given that I'm guessing you haven't been to space yet, but how do you get in that headspace?
I mean, I think artists are the medium. I think the reason why art and artists play such a important role in our culture now is because they're intersectional thinkers. They're capable of bridging the disciplines of art, science, technology, all these things. And, they have a version of the future that is not being written by the technocrats, that's not being written by the scientists, is not being written by the politicians. And that alternative version becomes really essential. So my job is just, I'm service industry to artists. My job is just to support them in what they do. And so in a project like this, it's less about me getting in the head. Obviously, I need to do the research, but it's about me listening to artists and then providing them the platform to do the work.
Very cool. You've already worked on some amazing stuff. You're working on more amazing stuff. I'm not surprised. Thank you so much, Neville Wakefield, for taking time to chat with us today on Ecosystem Member.
Thank you, Rick. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.